The first thing she noticed was the smell. It was not the normal smell of the village fires that kept the cold away at night. This was thicker, heavier. It's mixed with oil, fat, and burning wood. The alien girl opened her eyes slowly. Now the bright sun made her squint. Her arms were pulled painfully behind her back, tied with rough ropes. Her ankles were bound to a tall wooden stake in the middle of the dusty square. She could feel the heat of the flames below. They had not touched her yet, but the smoke already made her cough around her. The alien villagers stood in a wide circle. Their skin was dark gray, their eyes narrow and yellow. They wore bone necklaces and carried spears. Some had painted their faces with red clay. They were chanting something, over and over, in a language she understood only partly. Words about purifying the flesh and feeding the gods. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She pulled at the ropes, but they only cut deeper into her skin. Her mouth was dry. Every breath tasted like ashdot. A tall figure stepped forward. The village priest. He was older than the others, his head crowned with feathers and small animal skulls. In one hand he held a long torch, its flames swaying in the dry wind. In the other, a bowl of black oil. He moved slowly, almost with pride, as if the whole event was a sacred performance. The girl tried to shout, to beg, to reason with him. But the gag in her mouth turned her words into muffled sobs. Some in the crowd smiled cruelly, others licked their lips. She could see hunger in their eyes. She realized with a sick twist in her stomach, they were not burning her for any god. They were going to eat her. The priest dipped the torch into the oil. The flames hissed and grew brighter. Chanting grew louder, her chest heaved. She thought about her mother, about the time she used to play near the river, about the necklace her little brother gave her before he died. She thought about the life she had wanted, simple, quiet, safe. Now it would all end here, in the hands of people she once thought were her kin. The priest lifted the torch high. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the moment the fire would touch her feet. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, her body trembling. Then a sound tore through the air. It was sharp, loud, and unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't the crack of wood or the roar of fire, it was like thunder, but closer, angrier. The priest froze, looking around in confusion. The sound came again, and this time, something splintered in the wooden fence at the edge of the square. A piece of wood exploded into dust. The villagers gasped and stepped back. Through the thick smoke at the far side of the square, a figure appeared. He was taller than any of them, and his skin was pale like stone washed by rain. He wore strange armor, scratched and worn, with a long metal object in his hands. His face was hidden behind a helmet with a black visor. He moved slowly but with purpose, each step crunching in the dry dirt. The villagers hissed in fear, whispering words like outsider and deathbringer. Some raised their spears, but they did not rush forward. The man stopped in the middle of the square. His voice cut through the air deep, steady and calm. Let her go. The alien girl's eyes widened. She had never heard that language before. But somehow she understood the intent. His tone carried no fear. The priest snarled something in his own tongue. Two warriors stepped forward, pointing their spears at the stranger. The man raised his metal object and a flash of light burst from it. One of the spears snapped in half, broken tips spinning away into the dust. The warriors jumped back, fear flashing across their faces. The crowd murmured, unsettled. The man lowered the weapon slightly and took another step forward. The girl could see him more clearly now. His armor was dented in places, his boots caked with mud. He looked tired, but his movements were sharp, like someone who had fought many battles and lived to fight again. The priest hesitated. His torch still burned, but his hand trembled. The stranger's voice came again, louder this time now. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the crackle of fire. Then, slowly, the priest stepped back. He gestured for the warriors to lower their weapons. The human, because that's what she realized he must be, walked toward her. His steps were steady, his eyes fixed on her ropes. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't speak again. Simply reached into his belt, pulled out a short, curved blade, and cut the ropes in two swift motions. Her arms fell free. She staggered forward, her legs almost giving way. The gag was gone, and her first breath of clean air felt like water to a drowning person. The human glanced at her briefly, then turned his gaze toward the crowd. His weapon rose again, pointing at anyone who dared step forward. In that moment, the alien girl knew two things. First, she was no longer alone. Second, whatever this human was, warrior, wanderer, or something else, he had just made himself the enemy of the entire village to save her. Asterisk, the human stood still. The heat of the dying pyre warming the front of his armor. The smoke curled. Around him, wrapping his figure in a ghostly haze, his visor reflected the firelight, hiding his eyes but making him look almost like a machine from another world. The alien girl stared at him, her hands still trembling from the ropes. She had heard stories, whispers, really, about pale-skinned strangers who crossed the stars. But those were bedtime tales, the kind told to scare children into behaving. Yet here he was, real and solid, standing between her and death. The villagers watched in a tense silence. No one dared to rush forward. The human's weapon, whatever it was, had already shown power they didn't understand. The priest's voice broke the stillness. He barked a command in their language, his tone sharp and angry. A dozen warriors stepped from the crowd, their bodies painted for battle, spears and hooked blades ready. The human tilted his head, as if sizing them up. Then he spoke in a language she couldn't understand, his tone calm but cold. His voice carried something strange, confidence without arrogance. The kind of sound that told you he'd been in worse situations before. The girl's gaze moved to his hands. They didn't shake. They didn't rush. His grip on the weapon was firm, almost relaxed, like it was part of him. One of the warriors lunged forward with a shout. The human moved faster than the girl's eyes could follow. Blinding flash erupted from the weapon, and the warrior's spear shattered into burning splinters. The man didn't even step back. He stayed exactly where he stood, smoke swirling around his boots. The crowd gasped. The younger warriors hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Some glanced at the priest, unsure if they wanted to follow his orders anymore. The human's voice came again, louder this time. Though the girl didn't understand the words, she understood the meaning. He was telling them to let her go, to stand aside, or face the same fate as the spear. The priest's eyes narrowed. Slowly he took a step forward, clutching his torch. The human's weapon tracked him, steady as a hunter's aim. That was when the girl realized something. He wasn't just here by chance. He had come for her. She didn't know why. She didn't know how he even knew she was here. But there was no other reason for someone to walk into the middle of a hostile village alone. The human finally moved. Stepping closer to her, the crowd parted slightly as he passed, as if some invisible pressure pushed them back. He cut the last rope around her waist, then, without warning, pushed the weapon into her hands. It was heavier than she expected. The metal was cool, and strange markings ran along its side. Her arms almost buckled under the weight. Point, not drop, he said slowly, gesturing with his hands. It was clear he was trying to teach her in the simplest way possible. She nodded. Though her fingers were clumsy on the strange grip, the priest snarled something and pointed at them. The warriors began to advance, this time in a tight group, spears lowered, shields raised. Their footsteps beat against the dirt in a slow, threatening rhythm. The human stepped in front of her again, his body a shield. He pulled a smaller weapon from his side, short, black, and with a curved blade that shimmered in the firelight. The girl realized he was preparing to fight up close. The first warrior lunged, but the human twisted aside and drove the blade into his side. The alien crumpled without a sound. Before the others could react, the human's foot slammed into another warrior's knee, dropping him instantly. The crowd erupted into shouts and panic. Some threw stones. Others screamed for more. Warriors. The priest's voice rose above it all, but his words were lost in the chaos. Through it all, the human moved like water sliding, striking and never staying in one place for long. He fought not like a wild animal, but like someone who had been trained for this all his life. The girl's hands trembled on the strange weapon. She wanted to help, but fear rooted her in place. Then one of the warriors broke past the human and came straight for her. She froze, heart pounding in her ears. The alien's blade raised high. She could see her reflection in it wide-eyed, terrified. Without thinking, she lifted the weapon like he had shown her. Her finger found something like a trigger. A deafening crack split the air. The warrior stumbled back. A hole burned clean through his shoulder armor. He fell to the ground with a cry, weapon clattering away. She stared at the weapon in shock, her ears ringing. The human glanced back at her, and for the first time since he appeared, she saw his eyes through the visor sharp, focused, and proud. More warriors rushed in, but now the girl wasn't frozen. She kept the weapon pointed, covering his side as he fought. For the first time, she wasn't just the one being saved, she was fighting back. When the last warrior fell, the human turned to her and spoke in a low voice. She didn't understand the words, but the way he gestured toward the jungle beyond. The village was clear. It was time to run. The human didn't wait for the crowd to recover. His hand gripped the alien girl's arm firmly, but not harshly, pulling her toward the narrow gap between two wooden huts. "Move," he said, his voice short and urgent. She didn't understand the word, but she understood the tone. Her bare feet pounded against the dusty ground. The shouts of the villagers echoed behind them, mixed with the deep beat of war drums. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard the priest's furious roar. He would not let them leave alive. They darted through the shadows of the huts, past drying racks covered with strange meat, past rows of clay pots spilling with herbs. Smoke still hung in the air, making her eyes sting. The human kept glancing. Over his shoulder, his weapon raised whenever a shadow moved. Then she heard the sound footsteps, many of them, getting closer. From the right, two warriors appeared, blocking the path. One raised a spear, the other a curved blade. The girl froze, but the human didn't. He lunged forward, smashing the butt of his weapon into the first warrior's jaw. The alien collapsed instantly. The second tried to swing his blade, but the human sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted until the bone cracked. The blade fell, and the man crumpled in pain. The girl had no time to be shocked. The drums grew louder, joined by the sharp whistle of horns. The whole village was waking to the hunt. They ran again, turning sharply into a narrow alley. Here the huts leaned so close together that the sunlight barely touched the ground. Air was cooler, but the shadows were alive with movement. The human stopped suddenly and lifted his hand, signaling her to stay quiet. His head tilted slightly, listening. She tried to copy him, holding her breath. A faint scrape came from above. She looked up, and her heart froze. 3 alien hunters crouched on the roof, their bodies painted black, their eyes glinting in the dim light. They held short throwing spears ready to strike. Before she could shout, the human acted. His weapon barked twice, and 2 of the hunters dropped silently into the dust. The third leapt away, vanishing into the smoke. That one will warn them, she thought, panic rising. The human didn't slow down. They moved out of the alley and into a wider path lined with tall wooden fences. The girl recognized this road. It led toward the jungle. Safety was close, or so she thought. A group of warriors emerged from the other end of the path, their shields locked together in a wall. Behind them, she could see more warriors closing in from the opposite side. They were trapped. The girl's breath quickened. "Act!" She looked at the human, expecting him to turn back. But he didn't. He dropped something small and round from his belt into the dirt. Then, grabbing her wrist, he yanked her behind one of the fences. A heartbeat later, the small object erupted in a flash of white light and a thunderous bang. The warriors screamed, dropping their weapons and covering their eyes. The human didn't waste a second. He kicked open a section of the fence, pulled her through. They spilled into the open grass beyond the village. The jungle loomed ahead, dark, and alive with the sound of insects. The girl's legs burned from running, but she pushed herself harder. Every step took them farther from the smell of smoke and closer to freedom. Branches whipped against her face as they entered the jungle. The air was heavy and wet. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and fallen leaves. She stumbled once, nearly falling, but the human's hand caught her and pulled her forward. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit followed. The warriors were fast. She could hear them crashing through the undergrowth, shouting to each other. The human slowed slightly, his eyes scanning the path ahead. She didn't understand why until he suddenly pushed her down into the bushes. His hand pressed gently, but firmly over her mouth. Through the leaves, she saw 3 warriors rush past, their attention fixed straight ahead. They hadn't noticed the sudden stop. The human waited, his breathing slow and controlled. Only when the sound of the warriors faded did he release her and stand. He offered his hand, helping her up. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just nodded. They moved again, this time at a slower pace, careful not to make noise. The jungle seemed endless, but the human's focus never wavered. He walked like a predator, each step silent, every glance calculated. The girl realized something then. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was leading them somewhere. Somewhere he had planned from the moment he stepped into the village square, and for the first time since she had been captured. She felt a flicker of hope, but hope didn't mean safety. A sudden whistle cut through the air, followed by the snap of branches above. She looked up just in time to see a large net glowing with strange light dropping from the trees. It landed on both of them, the fibers tightening instantly. She struggled, but the more she moved, the tighter it pulled. The human cursed under his breath, his hands clawing at the glowing threads. From the shadows, more hunters stepped forward, their eyes cold and hungry. The leader smiled, his teeth sharp. 2 for the fire, he growled in his language. The girl's heart sank. Just when she thought they were free, they were caught again. The net glowed faintly in the dim jungle light, its fibers pulsing like the veins of a living creature. Every time the alien girl tried to move, it tightened, biting into her skin. The human pulled hard, his armored gloves straining against the strange material. But it didn't break. The hunters moved closer, their footsteps silent on the wet earth. Their bodies were painted in dark green and black, blending with the shadows. The leader, taller than the rest, held a hooked blade in one hand and a coiled rope in the other. The girl's chest tightened. She had felt fear before, but this was the cold weight of hopelessness. The human's voice was low and sharp. Close your eyes. She didn't understand why, but she obeyed. A second later, a sudden burst of light flared in front of her closed lids, followed by a loud, crackling noise like 100 branches snapping at once. The hunters shouted in pain, covering their eyes. When she opened her eyes, the human had already cut through part of the net, using a small, glowing blade from his belt hand dragged her free. Run, he said again, and this time she didn't need to be told twice. They bolted deeper into the jungle. The air grew thicker, heavy with the smell of damp leaves and earth. Giant roots twisted across the path, forcing them to leap or climb over them. The human stayed slightly ahead, his eyes scanning constantly, his every move deliberate. The girl noticed something: he wasn't running randomly. He was choosing paths carefully, avoiding certain open spaces, sticking close to cover. Almost as if he knew this jungle. Behind them, the hunters recovered. Their calls echoed through the trees, sharp and bird-like. The sound made the girl's skin prickle. It wasn't just a signal, it was a hunt song. They reached a slope where the ground narrowed into a single-filed trail between 2 cliffs. The rock walls rose high on both sides, covered in moss. It felt like walking into a giant's throat. This is bad, the girl thought, her breath quickening. It was a perfect place for an ambush. Halfway through, she heard the whistle. From above, sharp wooden stakes tied together dropped from the cliff edges, swinging down toward them. The human shoved her forward and twisted aside, the stakes missing him by inches. The sound of splintering wood filled the air, but the danger wasn't over. At the far end of the narrow path, 3 hunters stepped out, blocking the way. Behind them, more shadows appeared on the cliff tops. They were surrounded. The human stopped, his chest rising and falling slowly. For a brief moment, he glanced back the way they had come, measuring the distance. Then his gaze returned to the hunters. Ahead, he raised his weapon. The first hunter laughed a mistake. The human shot dropped him instantly. The other two rushed forward, but the human met them halfway, his blade flashing in the dim light. One fell clutching his leg. The other stumbled back with a bleeding arm. The girl wanted to run through the gap he had made, but the human's hand shot up, signaling her to wait. She realized why above them. Hunters were preparing to drop more nets. "Go low," he said, crouching. She copied him, crawling forward under the dangling traps. A hunter on the cliff tried to adjust his throw, but the human's weapon barked again, and the trap never fell. They cleared the narrow path and burst into another section of jungle, this one darker, wetter, and quieter. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly, replaced by the constant drip of water from the leaves. The girl slowed, her chest aching from the run. The human finally stopped too, his eyes still scanning the shadows. "You know this place," she said in her own language, even though she knew he wouldn't understand. But to her surprise, he gave a small nod as if he had understood anyway. She looked at him differently now. He wasn't just a stranger who had wandered into danger. He was here for a reason. Before she could ask anything, a distant horn blew. The hunters had found their trail again. The human took a small device from his pack and pressed a button. A faint map appeared on the screen, a glowing line, marking a route through the jungle. He showed it to her briefly, then pointed in the direction it indicated. Whatever lay ahead, he had a destination in mind. She had no choice but to trust him. They moved on, deeper into the darkness. The path narrowed again, this time winding around the edge of a deep ravine. One wrong step would send them plunging into black water far below. The girl's heart pounded, but the human walked steady, never once looking down. His focus was ahead, always ahead. Somewhere far behind, the hunter's calls rose again. Closer this time. The girl swallowed hard. The narrow path might have been behind them, but the real danger was far from over. The ravine path finally opened into a small clearing where sunlight filtered through the canopy. The air here was warmer, carrying the sweet smell of wild fruit. Birds sang above, their calls strange but soft. For the first time since the village, the alien girl allowed herself to breathe. She bent down, scooping cool water from a narrow stream that ran across the clearing. It tasted clean, no smoke, no dirt, just fresh life. The human stood nearby, scanning the tree line. His weapon stayed in his hands, ready. Even here, he didn't relax. "You never stop looking," she said quietly in her own language, though she knew he wouldn't understand. He glanced at her, then back at the trees. A rustle came from the far side of the clearing. The girl stiffened. But it was only a small animal, a furry creature, with long ears darting into the brush. She almost laughed at her own nerves. "Safe," she whispered. But the human didn't smile. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, his boots silent on the soft earth. He crouched and touched the ground near the stream. The girl frowned. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He held up his fingers, showing her a smear of dark green liquid. It wasn't water, it was sticky, almost like sap. He rubbed it between his fingers, then sniffed it. His visor tilted slightly, told the trees again. The girl's heart began to pound. "What's wrong?" she asked, even though she didn't expect a reply. He finally spoke, voice low and firm. "Not safe." Before she could react, a loud snap echoed through the clearing. The ground beneath her right foot gave way. She stumbled back just in time to see a hidden pit open, lined with sharpened stakes glistening with dark poison. Her breath caught. One more step and she would have been gone. The human grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the edge. His eyes scanned the clearing again this time. She saw what he saw. The grass, in certain places, was too even, as if laid to hide something. The branches above were bent unnaturally low, tied with vines. Shadows in the tree line didn't match. The shape of the leaves, they weren't alone. From the trees, Slow rhythmic beat began, 3 knocks on wood repeated again and again. It wasn't a natural sound. It was a signal. The girl swallowed hard. "Hunters," she whispered. The human didn't answer. He holstered his weapon briefly and took something from his pack, a small silver disc. He pressed it into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Stay behind me," he said. She didn't know what the disc was for, but the way he said it made her obey without question. The beat in the trees grew louder. Then the first arrow came, whistling through the air and striking the ground inches from her foot. Another followed, this one grazing the side of her leg. The sting made her flinch. The human fired into the tree line. Birds exploded from the branches, and 2 figures tumbled down, their camouflage breaking as they hit the dirt. But more came sliding from the shadows. Moving low, their eyes bright and fixed on the 2 intruders, one of them threw something, a weighted rope that spun through the air. The human caught it on his arm, twisted, and yanked the hunter forward before slamming his knee into the alien's chest. The hunter crumpled, but in that moment, the others moved. From the trees above, another glowing net dropped. The girl leapt aside, remembering the last time, but her ankle twisted as she landed. Pain shot up her leg. She stumbled, and one of the hunters lunged for her. She raised the silver disc instinctively. It pulsed once in her hand, and a sudden blast of sound erupted from it, a high-pitched shriek that made her ears ring. The hunter screamed, clutching his head, and collapsed. She looked at the disc in shock, then at the human. He gave a brief nod. Good. But there was no time to celebrate. The hunters were still coming, their movements faster now, more desperate. The human fought with a mix of precision and brutality. Every strike meant to drop an enemy instantly. The girl tried to help, using the weapon he had given her earlier, but her hands shook. Still, each shot she took kept the hunters from flanking him. Then, through the chaos, she saw him glance toward the far end of the clearing. There, half hidden behind thick vines, was a narrow tunnel of rock leading deeper into the jungle. "That's where he's been leading us," she realized. "Go," he shouted, and she limped toward it, firing behind her. The human followed, his steps never slowing, his weapon barking one last time to drop the nearest pursuer. They ducked into the tunnel. Just as another volley of arrows struck the vines behind them, the darkness swallowed them, the sounds of the clearing fading into a muffled echo. But the girl knew this wasn't over. Whatever lay ahead in this tunnel, it might be safer than the clearing, or it might be even worse. And from the way the human kept his weapon raised, she guessed he was thinking the same thing. The tunnel was narrow, the air damp and cold. Dripped from the jagged ceiling, echoing like slow footsteps. The walls pressed close on both sides, forcing them into single file. The alien girl's injured ankle throbbed, but she kept moving. She could feel the human's presence behind her, a steady force. His weapon always pointed into the darkness. Ahead then, from behind, came the sound she feared most. The hunters had entered the tunnel. The echo of their bare feet slapped against the stone floor. Growing louder, their voices carried through the confined space, sharp and eager. They knew the prey had nowhere left to run. The human slowed, glancing over his shoulder. His visor reflected the faint light from the tunnel's mouth. "Here," he said, and pointed to a wider section ahead. It wasn't much, just a small chamber in the rock where the walls pulled back enough for movement. But in a place like this, even a few extra feet mattered. The girl realized his plan. He wasn't going to run. He was going to fight here. She wanted to protest, to tell him they should keep moving, but the look in his eyes stopped her. There was no fear-only calculation. He motioned for her to move to one side, behind a large fallen slab of rock. "Stay down. Use weapon." She crouched low, her hands gripping the strange gun he had given her earlier. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The hunters appeared in the narrow stretch leading to the chamber, 4 of them at first, moving fast, blades ready. The human raised his weapon and fired. The tight space made the blasts deafening, each one a bright flash that burned into the girl's vision. The first 2 hunters fell instantly, their bodies slamming into the stone. The others ducked back, shouting in their language. But more were coming. The girl saw the problem: they had numbers. In this choke point, he could keep pushing until the human was overwhelmed. He must have realized it too, because he slung the gun onto his back and pulled out his curved blade. The next wave came six this time, rushing in with a roar. The human moved like a storm. His blade flashed once, twice, 3 times each motion, cutting down an enemy before they could land a blow. One tried to stab from the side, but the human spun, using the attacker's own momentum to throw him hard into the wall. Bone cracked. The girl's hands shook, but she aimed and fired at a hunter who tried to slip past the fight. The shot hit, and the alien crumpled. She blinked, her heart pounding. She had just saved him, even if only for a moment. The tunnel echoed with grunts, steel on stone, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the ground. The smell of blood mixed with the damp air. But the hunters didn't stop. More shadows filled the entrance, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The human pulled a small cylinder from his belt, twisted the top, and tossed it toward the tunnel mouth. A second later, the chamber filled with blinding white light and a sharp crack that made the stone vibrate. The hunters staggered, blinded, and deafened. The human didn't waste a heartbeat. He charged, striking each one in quick, brutal movements. When the light faded, only silence remained. The girl rose slowly from behind the rock, her ears still ringing. The human stood in the middle of the chamber, his chest rising and falling heavily, his blade dripping. His visor turned toward her. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. You fought them all." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his weapon, reloaded it with smooth precision, and gestured toward the dark end of the tunnel. They walked in silence. Her legs felt heavy, her ankles screaming with every step, but she followed. The sounds of pursuit had stopped whether from fear or defeat she didn't know. Finally, the tunnel opened into daylight. The air was fresher here, the scent of the jungle replaced by something else salt. She realized they had reached the cliffs above the sea. The human scanned the horizon, then pointed to a small cove far below where something metal and half-hidden glinted in the sunlight. It looked like a ship, but before she could ask if it was theirs, a sound rose from the jungle above another hunting horn. The last stand wasn't over yet. The sea spread out below them, endless and blue, its waves crashing against the jagged rocks. The air was thick with salt and the cry of strange seabirds. Down in the cove, hidden between 2 cliffs, a small craft rested in shallow water, sleek, metallic, and clearly not from this planet. The alien girl's eyes widened. "Your ship," she whispered, even though she knew he wouldn't understand. The human nodded once. His visor turned toward the jungle path behind them, where the horn had sounded. The sound came again, closer this time. Leaves shook as hunters moved fast through the undergrowth. There was no time for a careful climb. The human stepped to the cliff's edge. Scanning the drop, the rock face was steep, but not impossible. Vines hung down in some places, anchored into cracks in the stone. He gestured for her to follow, and swung himself over the edge. She hesitated only a moment before gripping the vine and lowering herself. The salt wind stung her cuts, the rope-like vine rough under her hands. Below, the waves hit the rocks hard, spraying white foam into the air. Halfway down, she risked a glance up. Through the leaves above, she saw movement shapes breaking through. The tree line. Hunters. One of them raised a bow. "Move." The human shouted. An arrow hissed past her shoulder, embedding deep into the rock. She gritted her teeth and climbed faster, her ankles screaming with each push. The human dropped the last few feet, landing hard on the wet sand. He looked up, raised his weapon, and fired into the cliffside above. Spray of stone and dirt forced. The hunter's back. "Jump," he called. She let go, falling into the shallow water. The shock of cold stole her breath, but the human's arm was there instantly. Pulling her to her feet, they splashed through the water toward the small craft. It was sleek but battered, its hull marked with scars from battles she could only imagine. The human pressed his palm to a glowing panel, and the craft's hatch slid open with a hiss. But before they could climb aboard, the first hunters broke from the jungle, charging down the narrow beach path. The human shoved her inside the craft. "Stay down," he turned. planting himself between her and the oncoming wave of enemies. His weapon barked again and again, each shot echoing off the cliffs. The hunters fell, but more took their place, their cries mixing with the crash of the waves. The girl, crouched inside the craft, spotted something, a hunter climbing the cliff to flank them from above. Her heart pounded. Without thinking, she grabbed the small silver disc he had given her earlier. She waited until the hunter was directly over the human, then pressed it. The high-pitched shriek blasted into the air, the hunter losing his grip and tumbling into the surf. The human glanced back at her, and though his face was hidden, she could feel his approval. But the hunters weren't giving up. One of them threw a spear with deadly precision. The human twisted aside, but the tip sliced across his arm. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped back into the craft, slammed the hatch closed, and dropped into the pilot's seat. His hands flew over strange controls, and the engine roared to life. Shaking the walls, the hunters reached the waterline just as the craft lifted, skimming above the waves. The human steered sharply, and the cliffs rushed past on both sides before opening into the endless ocean. Inside, the girl finally let herself breathe. The roar of the sea was replaced by the hum of the engine. Her body trembled, the weight of everything hitting her at once. She looked at him, this strange warrior from another world, and spoke in her language. "You didn't have to save me." He glanced at her briefly. "Yes, I did." She didn't know how much of her words he understood, but the way he said it felt final, like a promise. For a while they said nothing. The horizon stretched ahead, painted gold by the setting sun. Behind them, the island faded into a dark shape against the water. The girl touched the necklace. She had kept hidden through all of this, the last thing her little brother had given her. For the first time in days, her chest didn't feel so heavy. She didn't know where the human was taking her, or what would happen next. But she knew one thing for certain. She was free, and she owed that freedom to the stranger who had walked through fire and blood to pull her from the edge of death.